I'm so excited to launch my first podcast, Luna Talks with Anna Paulina on the Gingrich 360 Network. But let me warn you, this is not a podcast for the faint of heart or easily offended. This is a podcast for those who want to learn, to engage, to be inspired, and perhaps most importantly, for those who still believe in the audacious idea known as the American dream. iHeartRadio is #1 for podcasts, but don't take our word for it. Listen to Luna Talks with Anna Paulina every Friday on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Jack Armstrong. He's Joe Getty. We're the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Are you tired of gulping down the lying filth of the mainstream media? Yeah, we are too. We try to tell you the truth every single day.
Gulping down lying filth. Wow.
Nobody wants to sound dumb. Our goal is to help you not sound dumb. We'll inform you, and it'll be fun at the same time. You have to choose between entertainment and information. Combine them both with the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Armstrong and Getty on demand. 4 episodes available every day
via the iHeartRadio app or wherever you download your podcasts.
Welcome to today's edition of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show podcast.
Welcome in, Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. I hope all of you are having fantastic Wednesdays, wherever you may be across this great country or this great land. I am Clay Travis. He is Buck Sexton. And we have got an absolute bevy of show topics to dive into over the next 3 hours. Encourage you to go follow the show at Clay and Buck on Twitter. You can follow me at Clay Travis. You can follow at Buck Sexton, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you may be across the social media universe. And the social media universe now officially becoming under siege, Buck Sexton, as less than an hour ago, Donald Trump announced that he is going to be suing Facebook, he is going to be suing Google, he is going to be suing Twitter, and all of their CEOs, as well as sundry other aspects associated with the banning of Trump from social media sites. I believe, Buck Sexton, this is the biggest story in tech. I have been waiting for this to happen ever since the collusive decision to concertedly ban Donald Trump occurred across all tech platforms simultaneously back in January. And I didn't know whether Trump himself was ever going to file a lawsuit over this, but I believe that this case, or a version of this case, will eventually be decided by the Supreme Court, and I believe it will be the most far-reaching and important decision as it pertains to big tech censorship and the power of big tech companies to decide who is on their platforms and who is not in this entire era of big tech dominance. I think this is a significant step by Trump. Now, it will take years, I believe, potentially, for there to be a full resolution of this story. But I believe that our democracy, everybody wants to talk about the insurrection. I believe the far bigger threat to our democracy than anything that went on January 6th is the response to January 6th, in particular in big tech, and that this is going to be a seminal moment when people look back. And some people may think I'm crazy on this, but I believe when people look back that the biggest impact of the Trump presidency could end up being challenge to big tech over his banning. Do you think I'm crazy for this idea, Buck Sexton?
Well, no, because the most powerful media organizations in the world, without question, are the Silicon Valley giants, the oligarchs of the Bay Area,
yes.
Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon in a different way. They don't even, nothing else even comes close. We used to in the 90s, the 2000s, conservatives talked about the mainstream media. And I agree with those who say, no, let's call it the corporate Democrat media. Why give them that elevation of, well, they're mainstream. That means others are out of the mainstream. But that was the term we used for what felt like a cabal of these different corporations, ABC, CBS, NBC, and then CNN, MSNBC, all these different media entities on TV, and then obviously print and digital, the New York Times, the Washington Post. They had power to influence the national conversation. They were biased against conservatives. But now with big tech, this actually is has given back the left-wing advantage, the Democrat advantage in communications that things like talk radio and the internet initially balanced out a bit, and the rise of Fox News and other entities. Now they've been able to reestablish a kind of information dominance that we see with a former president, actually while he was president still, being kicked off the most powerful communication platforms on the planet. I mean, we have the FCC. There are things that you and I can't say on radio. There are all kinds of rules and restrictions about what can go on TV and political ads and what donors have to be. Oh, that just came up at the Supreme Court recently, but what donors have to be shown. Why have we allowed the internet to be this monolith of left-wing control? Finally, I think now conservatives understand this, whether you're on Twitter or Facebook or not, doesn't matter, because of the advantage this gives politically to the left. This is the central free speech fight in America today. No question about it.
And what's so challenging about all of this is, I think initially Mark Zuckerberg wanted to be a free speech guy. I really do, because even in the discussion about Holocaust denialism, if you remember that discourse, he was pretty expansive in what he was allowing people to post on his platform. But as we have seen the curtailment of debate in this country, a modern-day McCarthyism, the veil descend upon this country, much of it has played out on Twitter, on Facebook, and on social media in particular. And to me, Buck, the decision to ban the New York Post was a crossing the Rubicon moment for tech in terms of not allowing that story to be disseminated. And it directly led to the decision to ban the sitting president of the United States. And I testified in front of the House Judiciary Subcommittee investigating big tech back in March as a witness. And I was excited to be able to go there. And the analogy I drew, Buck, is we are in a modern day era where back in the day, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, Stanford, all of these different barons of industry, as we became a national country with the railroads and with steel and everything else, those men, and Ford, all those men became wildly powerful and basically were able to pick presidents. And then we needed a robust antitrust law to start to break up the power of those individuals. That's where we are right now, Buck. And what I would say, and I understand there's people out there listening to us right now say, well, just get off Twitter, just get off Facebook, just get off social media, because there is a conservative argument, or go found your own version, which is another discussion I think we need to get into. But most cogently, what we need is to acknowledge that if Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of YouTube, all these different platforms have the ability to ban the sitting president of the United States, it is a clarion call for those of us who care about robust debate and the First Amendment at all to fight the good fight. And I believe this is the fight that Donald Trump should be fighting. I applaud him for filing these lawsuits. And, Buck, some people are going to listen to me and they're going to say that I'm crazy. I believe, because immediately you know what the New York Times is going to say, and you know what the Washington Post and MSNBC and CNN are going to say. They're going to dismiss this lawsuit. I believe that this lawsuit will go to the very foundation of big tech power, and I think before all is said and done, and it will take years, but I think this will go all the way to the Supreme Court, and there will be a ruling which has to take into account the town square elements, the public utility arguments about whether or not we can see a banning of Donald Trump take place like we have seen so far. I applaud him for filing the lawsuit, and I believe this is going to be a historic day when we look back in terms of its overall impact in the years to come.
There is a degree of urgency to this, though, as well. And obviously, if it just goes to the normal course of the legal system, it will take a very, very long time. And yes. And I also think everyone should understand, and we got to know our enemy, so to speak, our adversary in this legal fight. endless resources. I mean, if you're talking about a company that can spend money, not just on the best lawyers, but as many lawyers and as many procedural delays and tactics as possible, going to legal war with Google and Facebook and these other companies isn't going to be an easy task for anyone. I think the Trump folks understand that, but just to put everyone's perspective in the right place on it. But then remember that we have a midterm election in the next year, coming up next year in the cycle. We have President Trump already out there on the campaign trail. There are going to be challenges. Now, people are going to start to say, well, hold on a second. How is it that you could have the former president and for many still the de facto leader of the Republican Party not allowed access to the same public square? And if we're not willing to treat these companies like utilities or start to force utility-like regulations on them, people are saying, the phone company, for example, or whatever the case may be, then breaking them up as monopolies also has to happen. But there's another big challenge here. I mean, I'm with you that it's great that Trump is taking this action and it forces a national conversation. There are a lot of Republicans, because I remember this in the last 2 years, the Trump administration, who talked tough on this issue, and then you find out that they've actually taken some really nice money from, it's actually Alphabet that owns Google, the company that owns, but they've taken campaign donations, or they, have some business interest or some future business interest even. I mean, the ability of big tech not only to influence the national political conversation, but also to act as oligarchs in previous societies throughout history where they can induce, they can seduce, they can get people to come over to their side who are supposed to be the champions of free speech and conservative values. So I just want to make sure that everyone watches which members of Congress, because there are Republicans, I can tell you right now, who will surprise you as sellouts on this. Because you want to talk about elites, you want to talk about people that can throw really good things your way if they choose to. The heads of these tech companies are, I mean, really, they're like the digital royals. I mean, they operate in this sphere of wealth and influence and power that's really hard to comprehend. I mean, they're almost like nation states unto themselves.
You're 100% right on all that. And that is why they need to be attacked and broken up. And look, I'm a capitalist. I believe in success, in using markets to drive your business as large as it can possibly go. But I also know people want to talk all the time about the foundations of democracy. You hit on something that I think has to be unpacked to a large extent. In 2022 and 2024, imagine, let's say that Donald Trump is the nominee in 2024. Imagine if there is a digital army of Democrats attacking Donald Trump all day long on social media, and he's not allowed to fire back. Your analogy, I think, is a good one of public utilities in town square. I want to discuss that in greater detail when we come back, because I do think it's massively significant. We don't really understand the technology that we have wrought. It's Frankenstein-like in the way that social media has grown and big tech has grown. And I think we're just starting to realize how many of these issues have metastasized into something massive. And I think we need to discuss this in greater detail when we come back. We'll also, by the way, open up the phone lines if you guys have questions about this. 800-282-2882. Donald Trump going to war with big tech. But in the meantime, it doesn't matter what your politics are or who you vote for. Everyone should have the right to express themselves freely. Sadly, the big tech monopoly has instead opted for silencing tactics and censorship. To fight back against big tech's control of the internet, I use ExpressVPN. You ever wonder how some of these big tech companies make as much money as they do by tracking your searches, video history, everything you click on, and building a profile and then selling off your data? When you use the ExpressVPN app on your computer or your phone, you anonymize much of your online presence by hiding your IP address. That makes your activity much more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers, and it encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. Plus, it's easy to use. Buck, why do people need this?
Well, you know how much we care about this issue. We led today talking about big tech and censorship. So now we're giving you a call to action. We're giving you something you can do right now. Revoke big tech's right to your data. Secure your internet with the virtual private network, the VPN that Clay and I trust for your online protection. Go to this website right now, expressvpn.com/Clay and Buck. Write it out, Clay and Buck. That's expressvpn.com/Clay and Buck to get 3 extra months free with our exclusive link, expressvpn.com/Clay and Buck.
Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, inspired by Rush on the EIB network.
Today, in conjunction with the America First Policy Institute, I'm filing as the lead class representative a major class action lawsuit against the big tech giants, including Facebook, Google, and Twitter, as well as their CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Jack Dorsey. 3 real nice guys.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. There you had the president announcing, and this is Buck, by the way, you had the president announcing this lawsuit that Clay and I are talking about. And Clay, I just want to point out to everybody that it's not even just the banning that we need to be very aware of. I mean, that's obviously a clear manifestation of the political bias that we're all talking about. But it's also the use of back-end algorithms to elevate and suppress, shadow banning, the way that for all of COVID, and I want to remind everybody, during the COVID pandemic, they suppressed. That was the first time that social media was openly suppressing. They had been suppressing conservatives for years, and they kept saying disingenuously, oh, it was an accident, right? I mean, you've probably seen this when they had, yes. We didn't mean to ban that. It just so happened to be conservatives every time. They did this openly under the health emergency rubric with COVID, including on things like the lab leak theory, where they were just flatly wrong. So they suppressed on the basis of public health things that turned out to be true and elevated things that turned out to be likely untrue. And now you just had, I mean, there was barely a whisper about this, Clay. Facebook is doing this anti-extremism warning testing. Have you seen, this is in recent days, where they'll tell you, we think you or someone you know may have been exposed to extremist thought. And I'm like, well, at what point is extremist thought anti-CRT? At what point is extremist thought teaching about Marxism and totalitarianism and the hundreds of millions murdered and enslaved in living memory by those ideologies? That's what I want to know when we're talking about big tech.
Yeah, and to your point, Buck, the algorithms drive discussion in a fundamentally artificial way because the algorithms have been designed to favor left-wing causes. And then the media, which already overwhelmingly trends left-wing, looks at what stories are populated on social media as a reflection of what people in the real world are talking about. And let me try to make an analogy here that I think is significant that people need to understand. And this is me thinking about it from a legal perspective, because I think this class action lawsuit that Donald Trump has filed will eventually end up at the Supreme Court. I really do, over trying to figure out how to draw the line as it pertains to censorship, big tech banning, and all of those things. There isn't a great example historically of the power that big tech has. But there is an analogy based on, if people remember, back in the day, it's not as common now, there used to be company-owned towns. So if you had a big factory, the company might well, on property that it owned, build housing that people could live on inside of that universe. You did not lose your right to free speech because you happen to live in a company-owned town. It was a necessity of life in order to work at these factories that you might not be able to afford, Buck Sexton, any other place where you could live. And so the Supreme Court, in a series of cases, had to analyze First Amendment there. And we can continue to talk about that when we come back.
Yeah, let's come back into more. There's just so much here, but, we all have an obligation, a sacred obligation to those who served. And that's what the Tunnel to Towers Foundation does. They help us keep our commitment to never forget. And this year, the foundation is honoring Gold Star and fallen first responder families with young children and catastrophically injured veterans and first responders with 200 mortgage-free homes. Chairman and CEO Frank Siller is paying tribute to the fallen by walking from the Pentagon to Shanksville and on to Ground Zero. That's more than 500 miles through 6 states in 42 days, the month of August through 9/11.
No doubt. And on Veterans Day, the names of those lost are going to be read out loud, which is why you need to make sure 20 years later that we can do good and help America never forget. Donate $11 a month to Tunnel to Towers at T2T.org. That's T2T.org.
You're listening to Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the EIB Network.
I'm Jack Armstrong. He's Joe Getty. We're the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Are you tired of gulping down the lying filth of the mainstream media? Yeah, we are too. We try to tell you the truth every single day.
Gulping down lying filth. Wow.
Nobody wants to sound dumb. Our goal is to help you not sound dumb. We'll inform you, and it'll be fun at the same time. You have to choose between entertainment and information. Combine them both with the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Armstrong and Getty On Demand. 4 episodes available every day.
Via the iHeartRadio app or wherever you download your podcasts.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Welcome back. I'm Clay Travis. You are listening to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show, and we are rolling through massive news that I would say could linger and continue to resonate for years to come. Donald Trump, in what I think is the most important battle of all the battles that he could possibly fight, has filed a lawsuit against Facebook, Twitter, Google, for the bannings that have occurred on social networking sites, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, suing also all of the individual CEOs. Buck Sexton, this could also be big because getting those tech CEOs under oath and making them discuss all of the decision-making surrounding the decision to ban Donald Trump could also further illuminate anti-conservative bias inside of these companies. I love everything about this lawsuit.
I just want to say we have to remember that Trump, with Twitter, took a favorite tool of the left and the Democrats and used it back against them in a way that they weren't expecting. One of the great things of the Trump era, honestly, some of the most genius aspects of his political maneuvering had to do with a kind of jujitsu. He would take what they were doing and throw it back at them. A perfect example of this is a lot of folks forget now because he so successfully did it with fake news. Fake news initially was something that the corporate Democrat media was calling out because of the Russian bots on Facebook.
Yes.
And that the Trump voters were believing the fake news. And then Trump said, you know what? You, the corporate media, are the fake news. And they went, apoplectic. They freaked out about that. That, of course, upset them to no end because they're both hypersensitive and very ego-driven. That's always true of the corporate journos. But on Twitter, all of a sudden, the president created a workaround to his, roughly 80, I don't know the final number, but it was something like 80 million followers, and no longer had to go through the filter of some, bull crap, corporate media interview, some sit down with one of the broadcast stations, where they cut the interview, they edit it maybe, they present it a certain way, they ask the questions. Trump being able to take the message directly to his base was something that they had to shut down. And Clay, the whole insurrection and the election and all this stuff was the excuse because not only did they feel like Trump had taken their toy away. They had to make sure that in the early months of the Biden presidency, you wouldn't have this massive Trumpian megaphone blasting Sleepy Joe. I mean, look at the Biden administration as it is right now without Trump being able to reach all those people. I mean, just think, can you imagine the jokes? Imagine the hashtags that Trump would get started about Biden. The one thing these leftist authoritarians can never tolerate is mockery, and that's what Trump went after them with, too.
No doubt. And to your point, social media is a natural evolution. In the 20th and into the 21st century, Franklin Roosevelt, obviously with his fireside chats, used radio, much to his benefit, a new communication device to reach directly into homes, which is what we are still using today 100 years later. Memorably, John F. Kennedy against Richard Nixon in the first televised presidential debate, people who listened to that debate believed Nixon had won. People who watched believed Kennedy had won. Television, and I think mastered in many ways by Ronald Reagan, changed the way that the president communicated with the American public yet again. And now social media, and I think Trump's mastery in many ways, intuitively in his nature, to use social media to reach his audience was an incredible value proposition that he brought to bear in the world of politics. And as you said, Buck, cut out the middleman and went directly to his audience as opposed to relying on other forms of corporate media to disseminate his message, which may have been done so in an inaccurate fashion. Now, the challenge, obviously, with Trump and social media in general is there's a lot of people out there listening to us right now that wanted the good Trump on social media without the bad Trump on social media. And I do think his usage of social media was not as adroit and tactical as it could have been. But what do you expect from a 75-year-old guy? I think there are younger versions of political impressionists who are going to do a better job of that.
Do you remember whenever Trump, I'm sure you got the Trump retweet sometimes, and I remember when that happened to me. The way I would know is because all of a sudden, all of my inboxes would be filled with like C-list actors cursing at me, and all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, the lunatic leftists, they'll descend on you like a plague of locusts. They'll come after you because a Trump retweet means they're all good. Because every journal, you could not have been up on the news cycle during the Trump presidency. You couldn't have been following it closely enough if you worked in politics without following that Twitter account. That was the kind of power that he had there. He made Twitter more relevant as a company than it would otherwise have been, which I think is also interesting when you look at all this. But here, let's there's a little more from his announcement today, the former president talking about it. Play it.
We're asking the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida to order an immediate halt to social media companies' illegal, shameful censorship of the American people, and that's exactly what they are doing. We're demanding an end to the shadow banning, a stop to the silencing, and a stop to the blacklisting, banishing, and canceling that you know so well. Our case will prove this censorship is unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's completely un-American. We all know that. We all know that very, very well.
Clay, let's assume for a second that it would be possible to get a judge to give injunctive relief. And one of the big problems under the Trump years was that all it took was one lunatic activist judge to do a universal injunction and to effectively block and nullify temporarily a Trump administration initiative. That was happening over and over again. The Ninth Circus would do the crazy stuff that they do. Even lower courts would do that. Clay, if we got injunctive relief here, if Trump's lawsuit, which is clearly he's laying out some of the things they're asking for, what would that even look like? I mean, I think this is one of the problems we have, right? Because you're trying to enforce a speech standard of neutrality. How does that really look? How does that really go?
It's a fascinating question. And that's why I think this ultimately, Buck, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Because I think the Supreme Court in a social media and digital era, and you're already seeing people on the court. Clarence Thomas has done it for sure. And Silberman, I believe it was, in the D.C. District Court, wrote an incredibly interesting piece basically saying, hey, we need to overturn New York Times v. Sullivan. And basically, our First Amendment jurisprudence doesn't fit the current tech industry in which we are in. I do think it's significant to your point, Buck. He's filing this lawsuit in a federal district court in South Florida. I don't know which judge will end up with it, but think, where was Trump's strongest market in terms of his growth in the 2020 elections? South Florida. Trump flipped effectively in Miami-Dade County. So many voters in 2016 who had gone for Hillary Clinton, the Cuban, the Venezuelan element, they all started going for Trump. Now, if you could get a district court judge to look at this and immediately rule that Trump is being harmed by not being able to reach his audience, that also Facebook and Twitter are violating the terms in YouTube of their universe under the existing guidelines, this could get really interesting in a hurry, because a federal district court judge would have the ability, in theory, if they bought into this case, to argue that Trump had the ability to get access back to his Twitter account. Where is that Twitter account even being saved, for instance, Buck? Are those 85 million Twitter followers frozen in amber in the servers at Twitter? I don't know. Can they flip a switch and suddenly it's back to normal?
And let's also remember that there were lawsuits brought against Trump for blocking people.
Oh, yes. That's what I'm saying.
And there were judges who said, you are not allowed. This is a private platform, but he's a public figure on this private platform, and you are not allowed to be blocked. So they've already set a precedent here for a judge weighing in and telling Twitter, telling an individual using Twitter what you can and can't do. So all it takes is one judge here, and it would be a fascinating situation. I just have concerns about, look, reinstatement would be the injunctive relief they want. I get that. But what does it mean? How do we actually have this going forward other than a handshake agreement where you won't show bias? What's the legal, you start to get into what would effectively be anti-discrimination language for political belief, right? We use this in other places, public accommodations and so on and so forth. What about for political beliefs? That's something that some states have already started to consider.
Well, and remember, Florida has has passed a law. Ron DeSantis did.
They did, yeah.
Banning the behavior that has occurred here with Trump. So this is, there are going to be a lot of people in the mainstream corporate left media who are going to say, oh, this lawsuit is dead on arrival. I'm telling you the opposite. I'm telling you that a lawsuit like this and some version of it is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court and body blow, I believe, in a big way, all of the power at big tech.
One of the principles that we continue to have here on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show is to bring you opportunities to save money and get great service, great products. This is just a central premise we have for you. Why do you want to overpay for cell service? I mean, think about that. And how much are you really overpaying? What if I told you about $800 a year on average? You could save over $800 a year by making a very simple switch to Pure Talk. Because the big wireless providers, they charge you for all kinds of stuff. You've all seen it. Clay, you've seen it, right? Sometimes they'll slip some $7 charge for your, like, what is this? Switching from Tower 1 to Tower 2 charge. They do all this nonsense, and it gets lost in the bill, and people say, oh, gosh, we want to save you money and get you better customer service, all based in the U.S. with Pure Talk.
No doubt. Customer service also based here in the U.S., Buck, and their CEO is a United States veteran who understands what it's like to serve. Pure Talk, top-rated wireless company by Consumer Affairs, and right now you can get an incredible offer. Unlimited talk, text, plus 6 gigs of data, all for just $30 a month. How do you do it? From your cell phone right now, dial pound 250 and say Pure Talk, and you'll save 50% off your first month. Again, that's pound 250, say Pure Talk. You'll have the option to receive a one-time auto-dialed text message from Pure Talk.
Inspired by Rush on the EIB network.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. Buck here with Clay, taking some calls. 282-2882, 800-282-2882. Plus, the website is clayandbuck.com. Please do check in. We put stories there. If you're like, oh, what were they just talking about? What was that story? clayandbuck.com. And as we're talking about social media, follow us. It's a way we can communicate with you all the time. Clay Travis on Twitter and Facebook. Buck Sexton, that's me, on Twitter and Facebook. If you're not already following me on Instagram, ask yourself why. I post photos of Tallulah the French Bulldog. That's really the only thing that's worthwhile there. But come check out my Instagram, Buck Sexton. All right, Terry in York County, Virginia. Terry, welcome to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show.
Well, thank you, guys. I hope you're doing well. I don't really have a dog in this fight because I voted for Trump, but I voted for my 401k. And I'm not on social media, so I don't pay attention to what he said or didn't say. I think it's probably unfair to keep him off, but I'm buying popcorn for this because you can get into the injunctive phase, you get into summary judgment. When they get to discovery, I assume his lawyers have told him they're going to ask him everything in the world he doesn't want to answer about that January 6th event. And he's not going to be able to not answer it.
Yeah, I don't think that's an interesting point. Are you a lawyer, Terry?
Somewhat.
Yeah, join the club. I think it's a really interesting point. What I would say is I think the big tech CEOs have far more to lose answering questions under oath than Trump does, because by and large, Trump has already had every single thing that he did surrounding the January 6th incident looked at in minute detail, whereas the tech companies haven't. And I'll say this, Buck, the filing of this lawsuit and making it a class action also may go a long way towards discouraging Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube from additional bans, because now somebody is punching back in a big way.
Yeah, and now you raise the cost of doing this stuff, and that's been important, I think, all along, is that they do have to make some level of business decision here. But let's also remember there's these companies, Google, where they had people at the top level. I mean, the CEO at the time had a town hall where they all had a cry session. They were actually crying, adults crying because Trump won the 2016 election. This is on video. You can see it. They're like, oh, don't worry, we're not all going to die. You know, it was crazy. But they run these companies, so let's not forget that. Terry, thank you very much for calling in. And we got Brock in the Texas Panhandle, not to be confused with the Florida Panhandle. Brock, thanks so much.
Hey, fellas, you're doing a good job. I just want to get right to it. There's something that we all got to remember. President Trump doesn't do things. He doesn't fly by the seat of his pants. He always has things set. He's got his ducks in a row. And I tell you what, he's got an ace in the hole. We all know what James O'Keefe has done in the past. I bet you he's got moles in all these companies. I bet he's got documentation. I bet he's got things that people have laid out and have evidence of them banning him. I guarantee you, he's not going in this half-hearted.
Well, Brock, I mean, we know he's banned. They're open about the ban part, so that part of it everyone agrees on.
I do think that Brock is right about the potential for people inside of Facebook and Twitter to be able to speak, as YouTube as well, about the environment under which the banning occurs.
We haven't even brought up YouTube this hour, and which is also under Google, under Alphabet. YouTube is the dominant news and information source for people under the age of 30 these days. I mean, YouTube it's where people are finding the voices they follow. And they are ruthless about banning conservatives. You say anything about the 2020 election, you say anything about masks, you're gone. I mean, they'll just kick you, and they don't care who you are. So every conservative now, there's a chilling effect on speech because you don't want to lose your business or you don't want to lose your voice, even if you're just a person who wants to have a YouTube channel.
You're right 100% about YouTube. My kids they don't ever watch television. They're on YouTube all day long, every day, Buck. It's where they go to get almost all of their news. I mean, it's wild. What about, let's see, Martin in Pratt, Kansas? Martin, are you there with us?
Yeah.
What you got for us?
I just had a thought that, I think it's great what President Trump's doing, and I hope it ends up costing these companies millions. And I hope that at the end of it all, it sets a precedent that mandates the upholding of, our constitutional right to freedom of speech. But I think that, of the millions of people that voted for Trump, of which I'm one, any and all that have had any banning or censorship from any of these companies, I think we all ought to jump on board and band together and file our own lawsuits against these companies and just.
All right, Martin, thank you so much for sharing. Unfortunately, it's going to have to cost billions, not millions, for these companies to care. Probably tens of billions.
Well, it's also a class action, Buck, so that's what they want, everybody to sign up with.
So it's going to have to be big-time money. CRT, critical race theory. We are going to dive into that fight with you coming up here in just a few minutes.
You're listening to Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the EIB Network.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast, right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
I'm Jack Armstrong. He's Joe Getty. We're the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Are you tired of gulping down the lying filth of the mainstream media? Yeah, we are too. We try to tell you the truth every single day.
Gulping down lying filth. Wow.
Nobody wants to sound dumb. Our goal is to help you not sound dumb. We'll inform you, and it'll be fun at the same time. You have to choose between entertainment and information. Combine them both with the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Armstrong and Getty On Demand. 4 episodes available every day.
Via the iHeartRadio app or wherever you download your podcasts.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast, right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Hey, it's Buck Sexton. If you feel like a lot of the country's gone mad, you got COVID lockdowns and all kinds of crazy Marxist tyranny from the Democrats, you're not alone. In fact, you've got reinforcements at the ready. Join me every day to be a part of a common sense conversation where we fight the madness of the left, speak the truth, and bring together like-minded people. The Buck Sexton Show. You can listen to the Buck Sexton Show podcast every weekday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. I'm Buck here with Clay, breaking it all down for you. CRT, critical race theory. It's starting to look more and more like the pushback against CRT is a full-scale national movement and maybe even a counter-revolution against the cultural Marxists in our society. You can tell that we have struck a nerve. You can tell the parents who are showing up at PTA meetings and school boards and talking about how they don't want their kids to be taught about white privilege and white supremacy and how awful this country is and how equity should replace equality. At first, the left pretended this wasn't happening. That was in recent weeks as they saw the surge. They saw the greater degree of involvement from people, parents mostly. But then it became more clear because of the work of folks like Chris Rufo that this had spread into classrooms across America and, in fact, into the corporate boardroom. They said it wasn't happening, and now they're realizing the left can't get away with that lie anymore. It's not quite feasible. So what are they doing? They're playing games. They say, well, what you're talking about isn't really critical race theory. It's something else. They start playing word games about definitions. They say that certain people that are cited as CRT scholars are just, I don't know, cultural Marxists or racial Marxists. But ultimately, you can tell that we've struck at the power of the Democrat left apparatus because the biggest teachers union in America has put out there that they want CRT in the classroom, the NEA. They want CRT in the classroom, and they will defend any teacher legally who violates state laws that have passed in almost 24 states against CRT. This is all intended to divide us. This is the way the left does indoctrination, to create people who will not think for themselves as they grow older. That's why they want to get to them as young as possible. And then Clay, Christopher Rufo, I mentioned him before, and he's at the Manhattan Institute and done incredible work on this. You often see him on Fox. He broke down that Raytheon, and we'll get into some of the details here, Raytheon, the second largest defense contractor in America, is teaching straight up CRT, mandating it for its employees. Is it fair to say, Clay, that if a company that makes missiles and bombs and drones is making people sit through white privilege training, that this is happening in most of major corporate America today?
Yes. And it's fundamentally racist, and it buys into the big lie here. People like to talk about big lies. The big lie is that America has never evolved. Buck, we talked about this on July 5th when we did our show coming back from July 4th, and the usual suspects were spreading the propaganda that July 4th is an awful holiday and America's a fundamentally racist and horrible place. And what all of that fails to recognize is this country has evolved in a way so that it has lived up to the ideals of the July 4th statement in the Declaration of Independence. And what's so frustrating, I think, to many of us, Buck, what year were you born?
1981.
1981. I was born in 1979. So you are the youngest possible millennial. I am basically the oldest possible member of Generation X, according to usual standards of when you become a member of a generation. The idea that anybody born around 1980 is somehow responsible for racist acts that happened before we were born, long before we were born, is the biggest lie that is going on and the biggest scam that is going on in America right now, this side of COVID. And that is what critical race theory essentially represents.
And that's also important to focus in on right now as the center of this cultural fight, right? That there's lies being told to children in school, because what they've been saying up to this point is, oh, no, we're just teaching history. No, they're not just teaching history, and we know it. And when I say we know it, we have the training materials, the teaching materials. Parents, because of COVID, have had more exposure because of Zoom teaching and all the emails back and forth to what their kids are actually being taught. And what was a few weeks ago a right-wing conspiracy or exaggerated in Fox News, that's what they were saying on the left. Now you have the biggest teachers unions in the country saying, oh, no, we're all in on CRT. We want to teach your kid to be ashamed if he is white because he is an oppressor, and then claim that that's history? Randy Weingarten, who is also responsible for masking up your kids in school and preventing them from being in school for over a year because the teachers unions acted like just authoritarian thugs during the COVID pandemic. Here's Randy Weingarten saying that she'll defend those teachers who want to teach CRT. 13.
Mark my words. Our union will defend any member who gets in trouble for teaching honest history. We have a legal defense fund ready to go, and we are preparing for litigation as we speak. Teaching the truth is not radical or wrong. Distorting history and threatening educators for teaching the truth is what is truly radical and wrong.
Distorting history, Clay? This is glorified left-wing lunatic sociology being forced down 9-year-olds, being forced upon 9-year-olds. It's crazy.
Yeah, and there's a big difference here between teaching history and discussing what history should be taught, and also teaching that America is a fundamentally awful place. We talked about this yesterday, and I think it ties in a big way, Buck. 18 to 24-year-olds are the only age group of adults in America that have a horrible view of the United States. I want to hit you with this data again from yesterday because I think this goes directly to the impact of CRT. When you look at the age of 18 to 24, only 36% are very or extremely proud of the United States. Just think about how crazy that is. These are kids that by and large were born around the year 2000. Things have been pretty good in America from 2000 on in the grand scheme of things, in terms of wealth, in terms of safety. And if you compare that with people who are 65 and over, pride in America is at 86% for those who are 65 and over. It's at 36% for those 18 to 24. How does that divergence happen? Buck, it's directly related to critical race theory and the idea that America, far from being a beacon of liberty and hope for people around the world, is actually a fundamentally racist and awful place. Now, there's a difference. You and I would agree, and I think a lot of people out there would agree. That doesn't mean that every aspect of American history is joyous or deserving of praise. Slavery was a stain on our country. So were concentration camps effectively for Asians during World War II. There are all sorts of errors that we have made in our course of time as a country.
Right, but we all know that. Do we have to always clear our throats about this all the time? Be like, oh, well, of course there are errors in our... Like, you know this, I know this, everyone listening knows this. I almost feel like, Clay, we're forced to be on defense here all the time by saying, well, I just want to establish that, of course, there's problems in our past. Yeah. I mean, that's the most obvious thing in the world.
Well,
right? We all know
that's what Randy Weingarten is trying to say, Buck. What's happening is the CRT people are saying, oh, they're trying to stop us from teaching about slavery.
That's
existing.
A lie. That's a lie.
Total lie.
And that's why the training materials that we have are so important. That's why the actual data and the visuals and the things that have come to light. I mean, we'll dive into the Raytheon. People should listen to the Raytheon CRT stuff we're going to present in a moment here and come to their own conclusions about, does this have anything to do with slavery or the history of oppression in the U.S.?
But that's what they're trying to obfuscate. That's where they're trying to confuse people, that Randy Weingartens of the world are trying to say, oh, they're stopping us from teaching the real history. There's a difference between, and this is coming from a history major who studied historiography and did a thesis on the study of history and everything else. There's a difference between historical theory and history. And that is what the distinction is here, that they're trying to pretend doesn't exist.
But a lot of CRT is also, and Clay, you're completely correct in that is what they're claiming now to try to, again, they're muddying up the waters. They're hoping that the parents calm down, that this goes away. It has nothing to do with history. I mean, they're teaching about, they have kids they'll line people up. We actually, I think, even have a clip of this we could play for folks. They'll line you up and say, if you are white, take a step forward. If your parents went to college, take a step forward. This is the kind of, and then the whole point is look at your white privilege. Be ashamed of your white privilege. That has nothing to do with history teaching, right? You know that, I know that, but it's important to go to the center of their lie here, because here's what I think is happening. And there's a theory, and maybe I'm a little ahead of this. I haven't even posed this to you yet, Clay, but I wanted our friends now with us to hear this. I think that we're at the start of a national movement here. I think in the same way that in the early days of the Obama administration, the just incredible, for the time, not incredible now, government spending and ballooning debt rallied people together. They said, hold on, the government is doing way too much here, spending way too much money. And that means the government's too powerful, has too much say. You had the Tea Party. I think right now CRT is going, right into the weak spot of the Democrat Death Star, so to speak. I think that this is their power structure. This is what they use to avoid other subjects. This is what they use as a distraction and as a look at CNN. It's every night, oh, another thing is racist. If we start to dismantle this and provide the actual unity that the Biden administration has utterly failed to do, they worry about whether they'll be able to keep their grip on power, because they are panicking about the anti-CRT movement.
Well, not only that, I think what it ultimately is going to represent is Trump was the great Satan that created identity politics unions. Now that Trump is not there, they're all starting to fight internally. And this was why I said the ESPN issue with Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor and the fighting over jobs and diversity and inclusion, all those people were united in saying Donald Trump was evil and he was the orange man bad and all those angles. Without that to unite them, these identity politics structures are going to increasingly come into conflict with each other. And that's what ultimately CRT is about, right? It's a great victimization pyramid. And your status in American life is not predicated on success or the meritocracy or anything else. It's based on, at birth, how disadvantaged were you relative to someone else? And if you are the bigger victim, then you win every fight. That's what the Democratic Party in 2021 represents.
We would love to hear from folks about any CRT that their kids have come across in schools or corporate training that they've been through.
Oh, that's great.
You can even tell us, you could give us a pseudonym, a pen name, whatever, you can call it. Everyone could say their name is Bob. We don't want anyone to get in trouble here. But 800-282-2882 is the number. 800-282-2882. We want CRT calls. What do you think about it? What have you seen? What have you dealt with yourself or your kids, for those who have seen that in the schools? And Clay, when we come back, we got to do this the Raytheon, when they're not
training.
Busy building missiles to drop or to fire at people. Bombs get dropped, missiles get fired. Then they're talking about white privilege and how you should confront your white privilege. We'll get to that in just a moment. But, as you get older, one thing is very clear. The day-to-day wear and tear on your body starts to add up, and you're going to have inflammation. That's just the reality of all of our lives, right? We're going to have things that start to get sore, start to hurt. But there are things that you can really do that will help with that, okay? That's why I want you to try Relief Factor, because it goes at the source of inflammation and pain. Relief Factor is a 100% drug-free pain relief product which addresses joint pain, knee, hip, back, neck, and shoulder pain. It's created by doctors and based on scientific research. Relief Factor helps your body reduce pain and inflammation, and it's the kind associated with aging, exercise, everyday life. My dad's on Relief Factor. Been great for his golf game. My mom is on Relief Factor because her back has been hurting her, and they're now both all about it. They take it every day.
And my wife is on it. She's young. She's healthy. She's going to live to be 115 years old, and she's joining hundreds of thousands of people that have ordered Relief Factor, and about 70% of them go on to order even more. That's why you should join the more than 500,000 people and order the 3-week quick start for only $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 800-4RELIEF to get the $19.95 3-week quick start developed for you. Go to relieffactor.com or call 800-4RELIEF. Relief Factor. Feel the difference.
Time slot on loan from Rush. Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the EIB network.
Welcome back in. Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We are halfway through the show, basically, believe it or not. Incredibly fun discussion so far involving your calls as well. You can call us, 800-282-2882. You can also go follow us on Twitter, at Clay Travis, at Buck Sexton, Facebook as well. And please go subscribe to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton podcast. All you have to do, give us 5 stars. Search out my name, Clay Travis, or Buck Sexton on iTunes or any other podcast-related universe, and you will be well on your way to never missing a minute. We asked for your calls regarding critical race theory, the absurdity of blaming white people for everything that's gone wrong in America, and also, by the way, Buck, not giving white people any credit for everything that's gone right in America. Kind of some smart founders out there might want to mention. Guys did a pretty good job drafting foundational documents, not having our revolution spiral into a descent of bloody violence, as happened, obviously, in France. Not very many revolutions where the leader, George Washington, stepped away, did not have an heir, walked away voluntarily. Kind of a lot of big, good decisions made, not to mention Western civilization founded on some decent ideas by white dudes. Just pointed out. But who should we go to first here, Buck?
Let's take Aaron in Mississippi. Aaron, you're on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show.
Hey, guys. Nice to talk to y'all. Listen, I was a Rush Limbaugh for 20 years. Just love what y'all doing. I hope y'all keep it up.
Thank you.
Y'all were talking about the CRT stuff. I'm a NCAA women's basketball official. I've been doing it for 10 years. And after the George Floyd incident, we had a bunch of Zoom meetings, and we were introduced to this CRT through a lady named Jen Fry. And it was what y'all were talking about. It was just all white privilege. You got your whiteness. And basically we needed to bend the knee to apologize for how white we are, what we are able to do in life. And it was all about inclusion in NCAA women's basketball officials. Now, I don't know about the men's side. I'm sure it went through the same thing. But in the hiring processes now and these days, and it's been going on for years, it goes in order that the inclusion, it's been going on for years of black female, black male, white female, white male. The white male has been totally pushed out of most athletics, and now they're being pushed out of officiating athletics. And it's disturbing, especially when I heard it, I was ready to quit. It's just because I just don't want no part of people that don't want to be around me. I don't want to be around them either. If they do that to me, I just don't. So I was talked into it. So I bear through it for a year. Wearing the mask on the court, it was ridiculous, hard to breathe.
Aaron, we got to leave it there for now, but we appreciate you calling in. We'll come into the Raytheon CRT stuff in a moment here, but if you're still putting off a mortgage refinance, Clay, you got to ask yourself, why are you doing that? Because especially these days, there's some great loan options with rates in the twos.
No doubt. After all, lower rate means extra breathing room. You can pay off other bills, put the money in an emergency fund, or invest it. Great flexibility. All much smarter options than wasting it on internet payments.
Call American Financing today. Get a free mortgage review and see if you can save up to $1,000 a month. No pressure, no obligation.
Indeed, if you like what you hear, they'll get you pre-qualified for free, and you may be able to postpone 2 mortgage payments. So don't put a refi off any longer. Call American Financing at 800-777-8109. That's 800-777-8109, or visit AmericanFinancing.net. American Financing NMLS 182334, NMLSConsumerAccess.org.
Sexton on the EIB Network.
A young college grad gunned down while simply walking his dog. A mom, Michelle Parker, vanishes after she drops off her little twins at the babysitter. An Indianapolis mass murder leaves 6 dead. Nancy Grace here. These are just some of the cases we're investigating on Crime Stories. It's so easy to think it will never happen to you. Never to my family, right? That's not true. It does happen, and we want to help. Every day on Crime Stories, we break down the biggest breaking crime news and try to put the clues together. We speak with family members, reporters, investigators, police, and specialists. Every day is a mission. Every day, a chance to stop crime and to keep one more person safe. Join us. Listen to Crime Stories with Nancy Grace on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
The new podcast, Rush Limbaugh, the man behind the golden EIB microphone. The incredible story of the life and times of a man who changed the way we think and the way we talk. From his first job to his final broadcast, through testimonials from his peers, his protégés, his family, fans, and those who worked closest with him. And of course, Rush himself in his own words. This is the remarkable life story of a man who changed America from a perspective never heard before. Now on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. I'm Buck. He's Clay. We are making sense of the craziness of CRT right now and getting a lot of help from people all over the country who are seeing it themselves. 800-282-2882 is the phone number. Remember to go to the website, clayandbuck.com. We're posting stories that we talk about throughout the day there. That's the place to go to see everything that we're doing here, clips of the show. And please subscribe to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, so we can catch those commies that we don't even have to name from some of those left-wing news organizations. But Clay, Clay knew this. I was excited in the break because I said, you can call it and say your name is Bob, and now we have a woman named, quote, Bob from Virginia, because she doesn't want anyone to know who it is. Thanks for calling in, Bob.
Hi. I'm a teacher in Virginia.
Okay, we won't ask the county because I know you want to keep some anonymity here, but you're a teacher in Virginia. What are you seeing?
Well, if you go to Ed Equity Virginia, all of the training, slideshows, everything that's going on there, and they're calling it culturally responsive teaching instead of critical race theory. They're switching up the name to culturally responsive teaching, but it's the same thing. My leadership team, I'm on the leadership team of my school. We had to take an equity audit to make sure all of our books and all we teach is, we had to do the checklist. The whole district has to redo their mission statements for their schools. And we also now have a diversity, inclusion, and equity specialist in our division.
So Bob, I have so many questions. I know Clay does too, but I'm fascinated by this because, as you know, Virginia, because you're a teacher in Virginia, Loudoun County specifically, front lines of the CRT battle. But I just want, what does the diversity and inclusion specialist do all day? I mean, I'm assuming there's not a class module every day on D and I. So what does this person do?
They make sure that all the lessons that we're teaching have diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just like the book, I was assigned to teach the book in second grade, Sparkle Boy, about a boy who wants to wear a sparkly dress, and his sister says no, and the parents say it's okay. Then he wants to paint his nails and wear a bracelet, and everybody says it's okay to be different, which I understand. To each your own, but I don't feel comfortable teaching somebody else's child family values like that. Like, that's not up to me.
What is the response of other teachers? So you're calling into our show. Do people roll their eyes? Do people think this is appropriate? Like, how would you assess your fellow teachers? I know every school district can be different, but you've got your perspective. Do you feel the need to not share that perspective with other teachers? How do they respond to this training?
Well, you kind of know, like, who's like safe to talk to, who's not. A lot of the Christian teachers are not having it. And then you have some that are all about, like, equity, and I don't think they think it's just, a kid doesn't have a computer and one kid does, and you want to make sure the kid that doesn't have a computer has an equal, equitable experience. But that's not really what is going down.
So just so we can be entirely clear, because Randy Weingarten, who is a hack and a propagandist and a fraud on many levels, and I'm happy to talk about that at length another time with anyone who wants to hear about it.
We can't strike in Virginia, so I don't understand. We're in a Commonwealth, so having a teachers union means nothing. I actually quit paying dues for the teachers union because they couldn't come to any meetings with me. They couldn't represent me in any way, so I don't know.
Well, Bob, what I wanted to ask you, though, was this is not about, nothing you've mentioned to me sounds like learning history. I mean, I might have missed something, but nothing sounds like it's teaching the history of this country that anyone's objecting to. This is all social theory of the present. Am I missing something?
But they're going to start weaving in different things, like, and brain pop. Who knew brain pop changed like this? Like Christopher Columbus, that history has changed, and they'll say that he took other people's land. I do teach the flag and the pledge and Martin Luther King. And one of the kids this year, when I said, the color of your skin used to separate us, but look at us now. And he fought for that. And they're like, they're still killing black people. And I was like, oh
my gosh. Well, Bob in Virginia, thank you for sharing your perspective. We got people all over the country. Do we want to take Bob in Central Florida next, Clay? I didn't know this was people. Do it. But people are actually, I have friends who teach who are scared to speak out on this issue, too, because they know there'll be reprisals. Bob in Central Florida, what do you got?
You can call me Robert, but I'll go by Bob.
There we go.
So I'm surprised you said brain pop, because that's exactly what my child was exposed to. I come from a mixed race family.
Wait, what is brain pop?
Brain pop is like a outside curriculum that's been approved where teachers can pull from a shared library. So they'll go in and put that they have a second grade class, and there'll be recommendations of videos and additional learning material that the teachers have approval to use.
This is fascinating. I've never heard of this. Clay, you ever heard of this?
No, I haven't.
Wow. Okay.
Me either. So I come from a mixed race family, and I'm very engaged with my child. Now imagine coming home to a 5-year, 10-month-old who doesn't even understand how to spell the word and the, and comes home is very quiet. She's very emotional, and I'm asking her what's going on. And her first question is, do you hate mommy because she's black? Is that why y'all aren't together, Daddy? Like, why didn't you stop him, Dad? He needed help. Where were you at? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, they killed him. They killed Martin Luther King, Dad. Why didn't you stop him, Dad? They didn't have any concept of time or history, and their sight words were segregation, assassination. They showed James Earl Ray getting locked up in a cartoon behind bars. They showed white people throwing trash on black people as they marched down the street. It wasn't an honest portrayal that white people were arm in arm with African Americans during that history. So they're selectively changing what these kids are viewing and leaving out major context. Not only that, I tried to ask the school after 2.5 months of demanding to get this video. They finally sent it to me because I emailed them on a Sunday and threatened to have cameras and news crews and everything if I didn't have it by the close of business on that next Monday. They called me on a Sunday evening at 5 o'clock and finally sent it to me. Now, that tells you how concerned they were. They didn't realize that I came from a mixed family until I voluntarily gave up that information, but the whole time they were trying to paint me in a brush, and once they realized that, their tone and context changed completely because they're like, uh-oh, we don't have this guy.
All right, so, I want to ask, sorry to cut you off, but I want to ask a question specifically. So your child is mixed race as well. Did you say what and she came home
1/4 African American. Her mother's mixed, so her dad was a Navy or Air Force. I apologize, Air Force vet. He's African American. Mother's white. So she came out mixed. You know?
Yeah, she came home. This is an interesting point, Buck, because I had friends in my neighborhood who have a mixed race family, young kids. They came home. They said, look, the kids, they're cousins, right? The cousins are mixed race. They came home the other day and they said, boy, I didn't even know how much awful things were happening to our cousins. They're 5 years old. They totally got along as all 5-year-olds do without being involved in race. And they had been taught that their cousins, mixed race cousins, were victims and were not safe in America. And they came home and they were suddenly concerned about whether their mixed race family was going to be able to get on the bus safely with them because somebody was going to do something to them. And I think it goes to your point about the age in which these kids are being confronted with some of these stories. They don't have the ability to conceptualize it.
And they just believe whatever the adults around them in positions of authority are going to say. So that's why it's so important that we know what's going on. Bob in Central Florida, thank you so much. We got a lot more to unpack here. I want to dive into this Raytheon training because that's at the corporate. So we're talking a lot about schools now, but on the corporate side, a lot of those listening right now understand that this is being jammed down our throats, the CRT stuff, diversity inclusion training, and there is a Marxist end to so much of this that we'll begin to discuss more. And also a very interesting idea put out by Tucker Carlson of Fox News last night. Clay and I might push this one back and forth a bit. Putting cameras in schools. It sounds, when you hear it, you say that sounds maybe too Big Brother or something, but does it? Something to think about for sure. We'll come back into that Raytheon stuff in just a moment. But, you know, these days, you put your money where your heart is. It's essential that you support those who stand for your values. If you want conservatism to flourish in America, you've got to be putting your dollars behind companies that stand for conservative values like MyPillow. Mike Lindell is a warrior for free speech, for the Constitution, and for being a good and patriotic American. And he's built an incredible company with amazing products. The Giza Dream sheets are on my bed right now. I've got 2 MyPillows on the bed. I've also got the My Slippers at home. As soon as I get home from a long day of work, I put them on. And Giza sheets, if you haven't tried them, the best sheets I've ever had. Ultra soft and breathable. Clay, you know, they're just, you just can't get better. I've spent a lot more money at department stores on sheets. My Giza Dreams blow them out of the water.
Yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. I've got them everywhere in my household as well. I've got them on my kids' beds. I've got them on my own bed. And right now, you can get the Giza Dream Sheets at a 2-for-1 low price plus free shipping with the promo code Clay and Buck. Remember, MyPillow products all come with a 60-day money-back guarantee, which is why you need to go right now to MyPillow.com. Click on the new radio listener specials to check out this low-price offer on the Giza Dream Sheets. You'll find deep discounts on other MyPillow products as well. Enter promo code Clay and Buck or call 800-792-3269 for these great radio specials.
Clay Travis and Buck Sexton. Culture they can't cancel on the EIB network.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. We are diving deep into CRT, the fight against it, what I believe to be the start of a true nationwide movement, a counter-revolution against the racial Marxists of CRT. And we'll dive into this more in the next hour, as well as Governor Cuomo of New York doing something that many of us said would happen a long time ago, which is using the framework of health emergency for a Democrat issue, Democrat policy they want to pursue, partisan policy. And in this case, it's guns. And then also the 6 months since January's so-called insurrection. We'll talk more about that and what the status is of all of it. But, Clay, I've been mentioning this Raytheon stuff, and big hat tip to Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute, who we've got to have on here. You probably see him all over Fox News. He has this brilliant thread. Here's what he writes. Quote, Raytheon, the nation's second largest defense contractor, has launched a critical race theory program that encourages white employees to confront their privilege, reject the principle of equality, and defund the police. And he actually has the internal documents. Clay, I just want to give you some of these, and you tell me if this tracks with what you're hearing from other places, other people about what they're seeing. The program is centered on intersectionality, a core component of critical race theory that divides the world into competing identity groups with race, gender, religion, and sexual orientation, all in a big hierarchy of oppression. Raytheon tells employees to identify everyone's race during workplace conversations. Whites must listen to the experiences of marginalized identities and give those with such identities the floor in meetings or on calls, even if it means silencing yourself. End quote. What say you?
First of all, this is the exact opposite of everything that Martin Luther King stood for, right? And this is what gets me so fired up about critical race theory in general and the way that we respond to all of American history. MLK, and by the way, I went to public school in Nashville, Tennessee, K through 12, graduated from a high school named after Martin Luther King. MLK took the lessons embodied in the Declaration of Independence and brought them to fruition. When sometimes you know you're going to lose, you set up in a dissent, in a court case, the seeds of what might one day be a win. That's what Thomas Jefferson did with the Declaration of Independence. And those seeds germinated in the Civil Rights Movement, which was predicated on the idea of judging everybody based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And what critical race theory does is take us back to a Jim Crow era when everything is determined by things you can't control. Buck, the least interesting thing to me about somebody is things they don't choose themselves. You don't choose your race, right? You don't choose your gender, or at least you're not used to choose your gender. Those things are not as interesting to me as the choices people make as individuals as opposed to members of identity politics-based organizations.
There's a really excellent clip of a father at a school board who is calling out critical race theory. I believe his name is Ian Rice. Play 18.
The problem with bringing it to high school and grade school level is that we don't have the educators to properly teach these kids. Instead, they're using it as their own agenda to indoctrinate the kids to hate each other. And whether you believe that to be true or not, the reality is that's what's happening. Critical race theory is teaching that white people are bad. That's not true. That would teach my daughter that her mother is evil. And who are you to educate my children, or any of our children, in life issues? That's our job. Your job is to teach them math and science.
Clay, we have there an African-American father who is saying that this is essentially teaching people to, he says, not essentially, that it's teaching kids to hate each other. And yet the biggest teachers unions in America, some of the biggest corporations, Raytheon's a massive company. They've embraced this ideology. How can this be anything other than a central fight for the future, for the culture and the political future of the United States?
I think it's a battle for the soul of America. And I think the question that's at stake here is, should you be defined by choices you don't make? Or, and I think this father gets to it in a very succinct manner, and I'm going to try to be even more crisp in this analysis, do you believe that you can succeed in this country? If the answer is yes, you're right. If the answer is no, you're also right. White, black, brown, yellow, whatever color you might be, there has never been a country that has existed in the history of the world that has given greater opportunity to all its people to succeed. And ultimately, I think what we're circling around here on is one of the lessons that I try to teach my kids every single day. The only hand you can rely on is the one at the end of your sleeve. And if you're trying to rely on someone else, ultimately, I believe you're going to fail, because this is about the individual. And if you are telling someone that they don't have the individual ability to succeed, then you are teaching them to fail. And that's what CRT does.
And yet they push back against all of this. They lie. They're lying to you. That's the first way you know there's a major problem here, because there are lies being told about how this is about an objection to teaching history. Remember, a few weeks ago, the primary line of propaganda, the talking points from the left, was that CRT isn't even really happening. It's not. Now the biggest teachers unions in the country are saying we're all in on this. And it happened in the blink of an eye, because it was happening away from the eyes of parents. And now, because of Zoom and the COVID lockdowns and people being at home and just the greater focus on this, we're seeing it. But also, Clay, I would argue it's because it's gotten more aggressive. The CRT teaching has gone beyond some of the sensitivity and inclusion, political correctness of the 90s to now actual division of spoils within the system, so to speak. Equity over equality. We'll get into this, and also Cuomo saying he wants to go after guns as a health emergency. Maybe some Fauci stuff. Hour 3 is already here. We can't believe it, but Clay Travis and Buck Sexton will be back with you in a moment.
You're listening to Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the EIB Network. The new podcast, Rush Limbaugh, the man behind the golden EIB microphone. The incredible story of the life and times of a man who changed the way we think and the way we talk. From his first job to his final broadcast, through testimonials from his peers, his protégés, his family, fans, and those who worked closest with him. And of course, Rush himself in his own words. This is the remarkable life story of a man who changed America from a perspective never heard before. Now on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
I am so excited to launch my first podcast, Luna Talks with Anna Paulina, on the Gingrich 360 Network. But let me warn you, this is not a podcast for the faint of heart or easily offended. This is a podcast for those who want to learn, to engage, to be inspired, and perhaps most importantly, for those who still believe in the audacious idea known as the American dream. iHeartRadio is #1 for podcasts, but don't take our word for it. Listen to Luna Talks with Anna Paulina every Friday on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your...
A young college grad gunned down walking his dog. A young mom, Michelle Parker, vanishes after dropping off her little twins at the babysitter. Nancy Grace here. Every day on Crime Stories, we break down the biggest breaking crime news and study the clues left behind so we can help crime victims and their families. Every day, a mission. Every day, another chance to stop crime and keep one more person safe. Join us. Listen to Crime Stories with Nancy Grace on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I am so excited to launch my first podcast, Luna Talks with Anna Paulina, on the Gingrich 360 Network. But let me warn you, this is not a podcast for the faint of heart or easily offended. This is a podcast for those who want to learn, to engage, to be inspired, and perhaps most importantly, for those who still believe in the audacious idea known as the American dream. iHeartRadio is #1 for podcasts, but don't take our word for it. Listen to Luna Talks with Anna Paulina every Friday on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome in hour number 3, Wednesday edition, Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. I am Clay Travis. He is Buck Sexton. We have had, I would say, a really good first couple of hours. Encourage you, if you're just starting off with us now in the third hour, go subscribe, Clay and Buck on Twitter. Go sign up for the podcast. Go give us 5 stars. Keep us surging up the podcast ranking list. We appreciate all your support. We also love all 400 of our affiliates plus in all 50 states. We started off in the first hour talking a lot about the situation going on right now where Donald Trump has finally filed a lawsuit. If you're just maybe tuning in for the first time, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all under siege as President Donald Trump now filing a class action lawsuit alleging that those tech companies, which he has filed, by the way, in South Florida, are violating his rights, violating their own rules. Class action lawsuit taking aim at big tech censorship. I believe that this case, or a part of this case, will eventually work its way all the way to the Supreme Court, because I believe ultimately Donald Trump being pulled off of these tech platforms is a major issue that is going to have to be addressed in some form or fashion in this country. I think it is the battle that Donald Trump, frankly, was made to fight, and I think he's ultimately going to end up winning it, although it may take several years. And Buck, as you pointed out, there's actually a little bit of precedent here because there have been lawsuits about whether or not Trump could block anybody on social media from his Twitter accounts. That was ruled no. And so I think there is a public utility, town square argument here that our democracy needs for our political figures to be able to speak as much as possible in as large of a manner as necessary to all of our audience.
One of the weak arguments that's being made these days in favor of the continuation of CRT in schools, by the way, is that it's now some on the left, and actually some kind of never Trump Republican types are saying, well, this is a free speech issue. Teachers can teach whatever they want to teach in the class. So now they're free speech absolutists. The people that were in favor of banning Trump from Twitter and Facebook are saying teaching your kids, if they're white, then they are stained with, immorality and oppression. It's just a free speech issue. Oh, no, wait, these are government employees, and these are editorial decisions, in a sense, being made by these government employees. So as we can see, there's not a whole lot of consistency when it comes to principles in the free speech debate from the left or from the never-Trumpers, for that matter.
Yeah, and this is why content-neutral rules are so important, right? Because the politics of speech can vary, right? If you look back historically in the wake of 9/11, Bill Maher got canceled for saying something that was not sufficiently condemnatory of the 9/11 terrorist. And
he said he said they weren't cowards, was what he said.
Yeah, which got him canceled then. And now, to his credit, Bill Maher has come back and become a defender of free speech of late. But this is, I believe, indicative of what is usually the truth. People defend free speech when it represents something they agree with, and then they wholeheartedly attack it if they represent something they disagree with it, which is why these big tech platforms need content-neutral speech as opposed to being able to pick and choose who's allowed to speak.
And also why the ACLU, and this has been true for a long time,
their job.
Is a laughable organization now. They believe in free speech unless their woke friends are going to be really upset at them. And then free speech all of a sudden goes away and the principles no longer really matter. I meant to get this before. Randy, I know I'm having a real, Fauci gets a lot of heat for me, Clay. So does Randy Weingarten, especially because, let's remember, she was one of the primary proponents of the science when it came to shutting down schools.
She's failed.
Which never should have happened. And now the whole rewriting, the Soviet-style rewriting of history from Weingarten and others like her is that, oh, no, they're big proponents for reopening schools now, though there may still be masks on kids in the fall, something we have to continue to talk about. But there's an author named Douglas Murray who's pointing out that Weingarten is... Then this goes to the free speech issue and what's really happening, and is this about teaching history or not? Weingarten is a culture warrior for the left. Play 15.
She calls these people, these parents and others, culture warriors now. So she's trying to turn this whole thing around. She's the one who's being a culture warrior on it. She's fighting incredibly hard for critical race theory. She's going to fight very hard, she boasts, for her union members who teach critical race theory. I just wish she'd ever fought half as hard for American students who've missed so much of their education in the last year and prioritized them. But that's clearly not her priority.
Right. You know how I mentioned before that this is going after the heart of the Democrat power structure with CRT, but it's also, you're seeing the teachers' unions are so essential to the left and to the Democrat Party across the nation, really one of the most powerful sources, not only of funding for Democrat politicians. And then you have the self-licking ice cream cone, right, of better and better benefits and pay for teachers as long as they vote Democrat, and then the Democrats give them better. And they usually back end it, so it has to do with more retirement benefits and things like that. But the teachers' unions know that they are essential to the Democrat Party, which is why they were able to actually push around the Biden administration a little bit on reopening. So this is a fight this is a fight we've picked, and this is a fight we need to have.
And it is well said that she's defending CRT more aggressively than she defended kids needing to be in schools, because science was pretty straightforward, transparent, and clear that kids were under no danger from COVID and they needed to be in school. And yet the vast majority of kids out there did not have that opportunity at all to be in school. So we've been talking a lot about CRT, and many of you have flooded our phone lines with your own stories about your kids and your experiences as teachers. 800-282-2882, to the extent that Buck Sexton even had to give you the ability to anonymize all of your criticisms, because so many people are afraid that if they speak out the wrong way, that they end up being targets themselves. And so let's dive right into so many of these calls. Let's go to Ellen in Cumberland, Wisconsin. Ellen, what's going on?
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen. Pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for carrying on Rush's legacy. I'm a lifetime listener of Rush Limbaugh.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. You're welcome. I need to fill you in on something that I find absolutely astounding and that I can't believe I have stepped into it. And that is, for years, I have been a huge fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Clubs in our area. And all of a sudden this fall, after the Floyd incident, all of a sudden the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is the national level, is hiring on H. Walker for the Division of Diversity and Inclusiveness and Equity. So I was on the phone call, and what was actually a Zoom meeting. So, we had a presentation, and, he's a very charismatic gentleman and what have you, but we are now being informed. The Boys and Girls Club has always been the most inclusive organization a person could go to, and that's probably why I've spent so many years fundraising for them, because I believe so strongly in them. And we welcome one and all to our clubs. It doesn't matter what your background is, where you come from. You are mentored. You are appreciated. So many kids have done so well as being a part of this organization. Now they're shoving all of this down our throat. So I'm listening to this presentation, and I'm being told that we can't use terms like illegal immigrant. And I thought, well, if they're an immigrant and they're here illegally, then what are they? And he had the term BLM up on his presentation. So now they're trying to push us, the board members, the volunteers, and the fundraisers of the Boys and Girls Club all over the United States, that we're supposed to subscribe to this theory, this ideology.
Clay, can I just say, and Ellen, thank you so much for this. I just say the point here, we're seeing this now, this CRT stuff, this indoctrination, it's everywhere. It's in every company. No, I mean, I would say everywhere. I mean, it is infiltrating every aspect of American society. It's not in every single company, but it's in corporate America. It's in academia. It's in social services organizations. It's in local government. It's in federal government. It's all over the place.
Yeah, my wife, I got to give her credit for this, pointed out in the wake of the George Floyd movement and also COVID that every single company you've ever known sent you a statement about how much they thought Black Lives Matter. And my wife's like, I just want to buy dog food, right? Like, I don't want to go into my email. I presume that most companies are against death. And most companies are in favor of laws being followed and everything else. But there is this, and I think it's coming from the diversity and inclusion people, the people who get these jobs, which ironically are using capitalism to get themselves paid, right? These jobs don't otherwise exist. And suddenly they're coming in and saying, hey, you're horribly flawed in this respect. And the only way you can be healed is if you pay me to heal your company. And there's so many people out there. This is what I think is the root cause of it all, Buck. I really do. I think everybody's afraid of losing their job. And if you are a white guy and you work at any of these companies right now, you're just like, I'm not going to be the guy who says, hey, do we really need to be doing diversity and inclusion training? And so they just get out of the way. It's about self-preservation, and this is what mob rule looks like.
Isn't it a great racket, though? Think about this.
Total great racket.
You get paid, and by the way, you can be a white liberal who shows up doing these, white liberal guilt sessions, essentially, and making really good money. And anybody who won't go along with it is clearly a bad person and racist, so then you can pressure them. So this becomes what this is. And I mentioned this when you're talking about ESPN and the sports reporter who, too bad for her. Wokeness insurance is really what's being sold here. If your company does these things, if your company pays people to show up and give you lectures on diversity and inclusion, if you're Raytheon and you have someone show up that says, we like BLM and put your pronouns out there for everybody and confront your white privilege and all these other things, then when it comes out that, maybe basically everyone on the board of directors, and I'm just making this up, but all the board of directors are white males over 60, or, the CEOs, the last 10 CEOs are all white guys making seven figures, then at least you think, if you're one of these companies, but I had the diversity and inclusion people come, so I must be protected. Doesn't always work out that way, but at least that's the only actual value they think they get from this. And the virtue signaling.
This is also the funny part about to me. When has the revolution ever been led and run by corporations? Like, this is what's so funny about all these idiot kids out there who are buying into this corporate woke speak. This is like the least rebellious thing you could ever do.
The real oppression in America, if we're going to talk about it, is about class, which is fascinating because traditional Marxism would focus on that. Instead, we have a cultural and even racial Marxism in its place because the elites who are pushing this stuff are overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly white liberals at the very top of the income scale. Nancy Pelosi wants to continue to live in her San Francisco mansion while lecturing all of us plebs about how we're not woke enough and we don't understand diversity and inclusion. And she'll have her butler deliver the slides to us for the next presentation. Chop, chop, butler. That's how this actually goes.
And also, she'll be able to get her hair cut no matter what COVID restrictions might exist anywhere in the country.
Let's get back into something. We got more calls. Also, Clay, I know this is a New York thing, but I think it's a bigger story because of the abuse of COVID emergency status that we've all worried about, and it's finally happening in New York. So what they do is they have the emergency health thing that's now going to be used for whatever policy. In this case, it's gun control as a health issue that Cuomo's pushing. So I want us to get to that. And if we can get to some of the January 6 updates that they're putting on the media, I think that's worth it too. But, we've got this withdrawal from Afghanistan happening right now. You're probably seeing it in the media. It's something we'll be talking about more here on the show. It should be a reminder of one thing. We've been at war for 20 years. We've had men and women wearing the uniform, putting themselves in harm's way, and we've taken a lot of casualties, and there are a lot of Gold Star families out there. And our sacred obligation to them continues on long after we've officially withdrawn from these battlefields. That's where the Tunnel to Towers Foundation comes in. They make sure that we carry forward as a nation a legacy of courage and heroism by honoring those who served. And the Tunnel to Towers Foundation is gifting America's heroes and their families with 200 mortgage-free homes. To honor the fallen, Chairman and CEO Frank Siller is going to walk more than 500 miles through 6 states in 42 days from the Pentagon to Shanksville, culminating at Ground Zero on 9/11. And Towers of Light will return to the Pentagon and Shanksville memorials in remembrance.
No doubt. And again, those we lost to 9/11 related illness are being honored at a ceremony on September 12th as well. It's crazy to believe it has been almost 20 years since 9/11. On Veterans Day, another first, the soldiers we lost in the war in terror, they're having their names read aloud. The words "never forget" require action. Do good and take action now. Donate $11 a month at T2T.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org.
Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, a new form of broadcast excellence inspired by Rush on the EIB network.
Welcome back to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. We've got every line lit. We're going to try to get to some more of your calls because I know we want to get a wide variety of CRT interaction stories, anecdotes from all over the country. We'll do that coming up here in a few moments. But, I've been telling Clay, this is one of these things where, he lives in Tennessee. Lives in a red state with relative freedom and prosperity, and American flags are not outlawed yet or anything like that. I'm here in New York City, and I got to deal with all the super expensive commie lunacy of being in Gotham. And Governor Cuomo is one of the worst governors in America, especially over the course of the pandemic. But we've been trying to tell everybody for a long time. I've been raising it. Many others have been saying the health emergency framework, they absolutely love this because it means that now they can say, well, it's not just the powers we had during COVID. There's also the powers that we can use for a climate change health emergency or just a climate change emergency or a gun violence emergency. Well, Governor Cuomo announced today that he is declaring the first governor in the country to declare a gun violence emergency. Let's play 7.
So here's my vision. It just came to me. Picture the border. We build a wall. We build a tall, big, a beautiful wall. And we have the wall goes for miles. And we have a little gold leaf up at the top of the wall. Little gold shiny leaf. And then we put a big name across the wall. And the name is 5 letters. You know the name? I can see it. Can you? Treat gun violence as it is, which is really a public health emergency. That's what it is, and that's how we're going to treat it. So today, first state in the nation is going to declare a disaster emergency on gun violence. Now, this is a national problem. I get it. But somebody has to step up and somebody has to address it. And the place that should step up and address it is the state of New York. And we should do it comprehensively and honestly and creative. And that's what today is all about, because this is the state. When it sees an injustice, we don't look the other way. We stand up and we fight it, and that's what we're going to do with gun violence.
A health emergency. Cuomo also was trying to make some wise guy comments at the beginning. We'll break all this down for you in just a second when we come back. But a public health emergency, he says. What happens if they steal your credit card and they use it? You report it, no big deal, right? Well, what about stealing your home's title? You know how this happens? The bad guys find your home's title online because that's where it's kept. And then they start taking out loans against your home. It'll be about 60 to 90 days before you even find out about this. And during that period, the home title theft is finding all kinds of ways to stick you with payments. And this is so easy. I spoke to a notary once about this when I was buying a home, and she said you would be shocked when you find out how easy it is for them to steal your most valuable asset, your home. But Clay, we got an idea to help people with this.
Yeah, we do indeed. That's why you need Home Title Lock. We have it, and you should have it as well. The instant Home Title Lock detects somebody tampering with your home's title, they will help shut it down. Get yourself protected. Go to HometitleLock.com, register your address, see if you're a victim, enter radio for 30 days of protection. That's promo code radio at HometitleLock.com.
EIB Network.
I'm so excited to launch my first podcast, Luna Talks with Anna Paulina, with Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. But let me warn you, this is not a podcast for the faint of heart or easily offended. This is a podcast for those who want to learn, to engage, to be inspired. This is a podcast for those who are brave and unafraid of the truth. And perhaps most importantly, for those who still believe in the audacious idea known as the American dream. This is not your average podcast because I'm not your average person. As a proud Hispanic American, I overcame adversity by joining the Air Force as a teenager and later on ran for Congress in 2020. Now I'm hosting my own podcast, Only in America. Come join me and be a part of the growing movement of free thinkers who put up their middle fingers to cancel culture and political correctness. Tune in now before you feel silly as the only one of your friends who hasn't. Listen to Luna Talks with Anna Paulina on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Welcome back in. Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show, rolling through the Wednesday edition of the program. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. Lots of discussion about Donald Trump's lawsuit about big tech, about critical race theory. As we went to break there, Buck Sexton, we were playing a clip in your hometown, your home state, New York City in New York State, where Governor Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, Me Too doesn't seem to apply to, neither does the standards of basic human decency based on trying not to kill thousands and thousands of people by rolling COVID back into the nursing home, something that smarter governors managed to avoid. But now there's a public health emergency expanding the overall reach of government, first in its nation ever to declare, according to Cuomo himself. The problem here is pretty transparent, straightforward, Buck. What we need is more cops on the streets enforcing the laws aggressively to protect people. Whatever emergencies you want to put in place other than bringing in more police are not going to work.
And yet, the way they speak about this, it's as though handguns have, sprouted arms and legs and are walking around. They keep referring to gun violence. No, people commit violence often through the use of guns. Nothing that Cuomo is really talking about here, because I have in front of me the actual talking points from his team today about what it is they're going to do. Deploy a public health approach to gun violence. Just understand that. A public health approach. They shut down churches for health reasons. They told you couldn't leave your home, double mask, when they eventually decided masks were even a thing you had to do, over your face, shut down your business. They took totalitarian powers into their hands on that. Now they're saying a health emergency is what guns are all about. And they've also told us, Clay, in the last 24 hours, that they're going to send vaccine strike forces, or whatever they're calling it, door to door. I think we're allowed to be a little on edge about this.
Well, this is what happens when nobody pushes back in a substantial way about government power. Now, I will say, it's not happening very often in red states, and a lot of blue state guys like you have to deal with this insanity.
This is his Tennessee victory dance for all you red state people.
I'm just going to say, we got no state income tax. By the way, we don't need you to move here. So I used to say, move to Tennessee. We're getting full, all right? But we have no state income tax here. We've got sane representation in the political parties. We are doing well, much like people in Texas, I think, and Florida and Georgia. The red states are doing pretty well. The SEC footprint down here. But I do think that the overall mandate for power that you're talking about, it's not ending. First of all, we don't even know if they're going to relinquish power associated with COVID, because every single time you turn on the news, there's a new variant that's out there that's going to kill us all, right? We had the Lambda variant joining the Delta variant, joining the Delta Epsilon. I mean, it's like every fraternity suddenly has their own version of the virus variants. But we were moving towards, and I still think are, a return to normalcy, and this perpetual panic state, crisis mode, allows power to be gripped and chaos is a ladder that Cuomo's trying to climb as high as he can.
Was that a little?
That's a Game of Thrones reference.
That is a Game of Thrones Littlefinger reference you just slipped in there, which I appreciate. And I would say this about what we're seeing with Cuomo on the gun violence situation, which is a power grab, and I think you'll see other states. And by the way, Mr. Tennessee, you're not safe from the federal government there. This Biden administration's got a bunch of wackos when it comes to guns at the top, including running the ATF. So don't get too high on your freedom horse there for a second. But I would say beyond that, here's what they really, and you and I know this because we've been talking about the Eric Adams mayoral race in New York. Looks like Eric Adams is the guy. He won the Democrat primary, which means he's almost certain. I mean, I love Curtis Sliwa, but it's almost certain that Sliwa's the Republican, Eric Adams is the Democrat in New York City's mayoral race. Adams won because he was I'm actually going to try to tackle crime guy. Now, will he do that remains a very open question. But Democrats are terrified of the public coming to the fundamental realization that the last 12 months, the defund police, all this stuff, they put us through this, and it was stupid, and we suffered as a result, and they should therefore suffer at the ballot box. That's what they don't want people to think about.
Well, and they're trying to distort. I don't know if you read this. I know we were texting about it right before the show. The Washington Post, not exactly a beacon for fairness, came out and said that all of the defund the police claims that Jen Psaki and Cedric Richmond, I think it is, all the people defending the Biden administration and the Democrats are lying when they try to say that. By the way, a guy who was on top of critical race theory, certainly, and telling you why it mattered so much historically in this country. Of course, the man you have listened to for decades, the man that we are helping to fill the shoes of, Rush Limbaugh. Here were his thoughts on critical race theory.
From Fox News, a school district in Wisconsin said that they will review a high school diversity class that exposed students to radical leftist thinkers and promoted a critical race theory that alleges white people are oppressors. And one of the parents reported to Fox News that it was a white privilege class teaching white guilt. One parent told Fox. They divide the students and they say to the non-whites, you have been oppressed and you're still being oppressed. The parent, who asked not to be identified, has an 18-year-old son who was enrolled in the class and became alarmed after she looked at some of the handouts provided to the students. The parent said, I felt it was indoctrination. This is a radical left agenda and ideology that's now embedded in our school, and it is, and has been for a while. It's called the multicultural curriculum, and the multicultural curriculum teaches this. The multicultural curriculum is 25 or 30 years old, if not older than that. And it teaches anti-Western civ. It teaches that white European settlers came here and started causing all the trouble. White Europeans brought with them racism, sexism, environmental destruction, homophobia, all of that. That is taught. What's happened here is a parent just caught on to it. This has been taught this way for a long time. Now they're just being upfront and honest. The teacher is about what is being taught rather than subtly indoctrinating the kids. And they're calling it white privilege, and they're calling it oppression, and they're saying it still exists, and that there's segregation, and they divide the class up that way. The parent said the students were taught if you're white, you're oppressing. If you're not white, you're a victim. Yeah? Isn't that liberalism today? I don't mean to sound know-it-all. It's not a surprise to me. In fact, I'm a little bit encouraged that a parent finally sees what's going on, has called attention to it.
Parents are the ones, Clay, who have called attention now to this and created this national uproar, the counter-revolution against the racial Marxism of CRT. So it just goes to show you grassroots organizing and people coming together around fundamental conservative values, or just
basic American values.
Basic American values was what we're really talking about here. Still can have a lot of resonance.
I always talk, I always talk, Buck, about the difference between...
Did you just Will Kane me, my old friend? You just Will Kane me? We're giving Will a shout out here.
Will does a great job. I was reading the story that one of my writers at Outkick, Bobby Barack, put up about who the hosts are going to be at 7 o'clock on Fox. And I'm actually scheduled to go on here soon. You've been on with Will. I've been on a lot with Will. And I was reading that, and then I looked back up and immediately thought, oh, this is Will Kay that I'm talking with instead of Buck Sexton. So here's the deal. What is amazing to me about this is I think there's a real argument here. Instead of focusing on basic conservative values, I think you just distinguish. Labeling is so important. The left wing does such a great job of this. Sane versus insane, right? Critical race theory is insane to the average American, regardless of their background, when you actually look into the data. Nobody likes this. It's rooted in political correctness. It's rooted in Marxism. Everybody is opposed to it in numbers, 75 or 80%. We got to start labeling crazy, wacky, outlandish ideas for what they are, true insanity.
I mean, of course, I agree with you, but now let's think about all the places where it has infiltrated and why we have every line lit up with people telling us all over the country that they've been up against this too. So remember, the Bolsheviks, folks, if we're going to go back in a little history here, the Bolsheviks were never popular. They were never a majority. There were never a lot of them. And yet they overthrew the Tsar and overtook the Russian government and created the Soviet Union. Now, I'm not saying that CRT is leading us to the Soviet Union, but a dedicated minority that is ideologically committed can overcome the majority if they understand the nodes of power, if they understand the levers of influence. Things, Clay, like social media giants, teachers unions, massive corporations. You start to see how the influence far outweighs their numbers. So you're right about the numbers, but we have to understand the scale of this threat. Well, do you want to come to some calls, Clay?
Let's close out the show. We've had a lot of people waiting. I want to thank everybody out there who's been such a big fan of the program. But in the meantime, what you got for us, Buck?
I mean, the debt is out of control. We know that. Almost, what is it? Over 28 trillion. We're going to be at 30 trillion before you know it. And this is a simple math thing, folks. This is numbers. At some point, with so many more dollars in circulation and so much more in our national debt, the U.S. currency is going to be under a lot of pressure. You're going to see inflation. It's already happening. And we're heading into some stormy economic times. You can protect your retirement and your savings today with real gold and silver from the Oxford Gold Group. And I don't mean gold and silver ETFs. I'm talking about gold and silver that you can have in your hands. You can keep in a safe. You've got it. Buy gold and silver from the Oxford Gold Group. That's who I trust. It's who I get my gold and silver from. Give them a call right now at 833-404-GOLD. They'll answer all your questions and send you their investment guide. 833-404-GOLD. You can have real gold or silver in your IRA or 401k. The Oxford Gold Group can help. Give them a call today. 833-404-GOLD.
Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, a new form of broadcast excellence inspired by Rush on the EIB network.
Welcome back in. Final segment, Wednesday edition of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. I am Clay Travis. You should go subscribe to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. Give us 5 stars. We are going to read some witty, some humorous, some entertaining 5-star reviews on iTunes. Encourage you to go do that. We wanted to try to get as many of your calls in. We've had I think, pretty fantastic show talking about all the biggest issues of the day. Donald Trump suing big tech, as well as critical race theory, big topics of the day right now. And there have been a lot of people waiting a long time to be able to talk to us. I want you guys to all get in, go as quickly as you can. Let's start.
We got another Bob. We got a lot of Bobs calling in. I didn't realize that was going to be such a thing, Clay.
Another woman named Bob who wants to avoid using her actual name. She is in Minneapolis. What have you got for us?
Hey, Bob. Hey, Clay, Buck. Thanks.
Yes.
Love you guys. I was introduced very early in 2018 for an inclusion privilege activity at the place of my business. It was mandatory. Didn't know I was getting into, and I realized it was early CRT. It is called Privilege Walk Exercise, created by Peggy McIntosh. So people need to research Peggy McIntosh. They ask questions of gender, sex, nationality, citizenship, specifically U.S., class. They ask race questions, authority, respect, credibility, age, religious. and it was a 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Well, they actually make it's during some of these exercises. It's commonplace, Bob. Well, they'll set up everyone in a line, and as I said before, they'll tell you if you are white, if you are male, if you had parents who went to college, and they go through this whole list, and you keep stepping further and further away from people. The idea being that you're actually being shamed for what are supposed to be, under their framework they're describing, your advantages. This is in front of your colleagues. I mean, Clay, this is, when you think about this, it's so weird. After you go through all this stuff and there's this public shaming, speaking of Game of Thrones, it's like, they're walking around with the bell and the whole thing. There's this public shaming that happens, and then you're supposed to go to the break room afterwards and be like, yeah, sorry I'm such an oppressor, but, pass me the milk carton.
Not only that, it completely characterizes everything that you do at your job as racial in nature. When the vast majority, I think, of people out there who interact on a day-to-day basis don't think of the race of the person that they are interacting with as somehow being fundamental to that interaction. Because if you do that, if you're constantly obsessed with race all the time, that's kind of a sign you might be racist.
The fundamental question that we face right now, and really I would say it's a conclusion that is growing in a lot of places across the country, is critical race theory racism? Are we instructing people?
It's 100% racism.
Right. And
we're
that's
instructing racism in our kids.
That's the revelation that has come along that has the left so worried. Rich in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Welcome to Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show. I'm Buck. He's Clay. What's up?
Hey, thanks for taking the call. I'm calling about Secretary of Defense's Austin's comments on the 23rd of June. He said, "We do not teach critical race theory. We're focused on extremist behaviors." Now, was he talking about just the soldiers? What about the 70,000 military kids in the 160 DOD schools overseas? Those schools don't come under the Department of Education. They're under the Department of Defense. And if the parents are involved and they object, is that an extremist behavior he's talking about? We need to know this. No one joined the military to have their kids indoctrinated by a political Department of Defense. Someone needs to ask General Milley and Secretary Austin what their plans are for the schools overseas.
One thing,
that's a great point.
Yeah, one thing that has been very clear here is you've seen some of these 4-star generals. People are now I think much more aware that they're largely politicians in many cases. I mean, they're sitting in desks in D.C. at the Pentagon, and they want to stay in their perch within the bureaucracy. They want to be well thought of by the D.C. elites. And so, again, they play these games with, we just have on the reading list white fragility. But we're not telling. Well, you're telling people, go read this. It's important for you to understand.
No, I think that's exactly right. But when you put something on a reading list, you are by its nature saying this is valuable for you to expose yourself to. There is an inherent learning aspect associated with the list itself.
And I think this is also what conservatives are waking up to, is that when it comes to education, there are facts, but there's no neutral space. People are going to be taught something, so we can either be involved in understanding what kids, in this case, will be taught in schools, or we can cede that ground to Marxists who don't want cameras in the classroom, which is interesting. I mean, I'm not even saying that's a good idea, Clay, but it's interesting how much they revolt against it. I know we can probably return to this tomorrow, along with we did not get into the insurrection hysteria today, and I really want us to dive into that.
Yeah, we got to get into the insurrection hysteria, but I think also your question, and I know Tucker Carlson raised it on Fox News, about having cameras in the classrooms. As a parent, it's a fascinating question to me. I'm not sure that I know my answer 100%, but I don't think it's an absurd debate at all.
We're going to be with you all tomorrow. We thank you for being with us today. Please check out the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show podcast. You can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The iHeart app is a great place to start. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars. Give us a review. Talk to you tomorrow, everybody.
You're listening to Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the EIB Network.
I'm Jack Armstrong. He's Joe Getty. We're the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Are you tired of gulping down the lying filth of the mainstream media? Yeah, we are too. We try to tell you the truth every single day.
Gulping down lying filth. Wow.
Nobody wants to sound dumb. Our goal is to help you not sound dumb. We'll inform you, and it'll be fun at the same time. You don't have to choose between entertainment and information. Combine them both with the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Armstrong and Getty On Demand. 4 episodes available every day.
Via the iHeartRadio app or wherever you download your podcasts.
I am so excited to launch my first podcast, Luna Talks with Anna Paulina on the Gingrich 360 Network. But let me warn you, this is not a podcast for the faint of heart or easily offended. This is a podcast for those who want to learn, to engage, to be inspired, and perhaps most importantly, for those who still believe in the audacious idea known as the American dream. iHeartRadio is #1 for podcasts, but don't take our word for it. Listen to Luna Talks with Anna Paulina every Friday on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you get your